anyone watching at home, so remembering the meeting is webcast now. So, Housing Policy Committee, 5th of December 2024. Was just the usual housekeeping. So, usual housekeeping is please turn your phones off or onto silent, and I'll do mine in a moment. There's no fire alarm test. If the fire alarm goes off, get out by following other people who are getting out, and the staff will direct you if there's any uncertainty. Toilets are in the usual places. Again, if you visitor and you don't know where, then just ask a member of staff. I think those are the main things there, and it probably makes sense if we go around and just introduce who the members of the committee are. So I'll just start. So as Douglas Johnson, I'm a councillor for City Ward, and I chair this committee. And I'll go around this way this time.
I'm Paul Turpin, Green Councillor for Gleadless Valley Ward.
Hello, Councillor Penny Baker, Councillor for Stannington Ward and Deputy Chair.
Councillor Woodcock, Councillor for East Ecclesfield.
Yeah, Councillor Richard Williams, elected member for Stannington Ward.
Sorry, for half asleep there. Councillor Mark Jones, Burngreave Ward, Labour.
Mike Chaplin, Labour Councillor for Saldy Ward.
Mia Drazik, Councillor for Park and Arbourthorne.
And Alison Norris, Councillor for Woodhouse and Labour Group spokesperson.
Thank you very much, everyone. Okay, we'll just go through the officers as usual. So I'll start on my left here.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Ajman Ali, Executive Director of Neighbourhood Services.
Hello, everybody. It's Sherry Grant, Assistant Director, Legal Services.
Thanks, Sherry.
Hello, I'm Amanda Clayton from Democratic Services, Clerk to the Committee.
And I'll just mention Alan, who's doing the techie stuff quietly in the background. Thank you. So for anyone else, we've got a number of other people. Even when people come up to speak at the extra microphones, if you could introduce yourselves then, it's probably easier for the flow of the meeting. Thank you very much. So, apologies for absence. It looks like everyone's here, so there's no apologies. Number 2 is exclusion of press and public, and I don't think we've got any reason to do that this afternoon. No. 3 is declarations of interest. Anyone not expecting any? No, none. Number 4 is the minutes of the previous meeting. So they're on page 11. I assume that everyone's read these, checked them, and has flagged up anything of significance. People are happy to accept those as a correct record. Getting nods, so that's unanimous support there. Thank you. Number 5 is the public questions, petitions, statements, etc. So to summarise those, we've got no petitions. We've had one public question, also from Judy Greenwood at EcoFit. So there's a written question and a written answer that's now available on our website under the agenda for this meeting. And I think I'm correct in saying there's no further questions to be asked orally at the meeting. So I'm going to refer to that. I have to say, it's quite a technical, and so it's worth reading if you want to have a look at that. Judy, you're here today. That's very welcome, and you've got contact details to follow up with us afterwards. So that's good. I think that covers everything on item 5. I'm going to look at Amanda now. Yeah, is that right? Okay. In that case, move on to members' questions. We don't have any formally today, do we? No. 7 is the work programmes. So this is where I'll hand over to Amanda and ask everyone to turn to page 25 onwards.
Yes, and there are a couple of points I'd like to pick up if that's okay. So at the last meeting, we discussed the tenants levy and requested that a consultation be launched and then that the results come back in January. So that hasn't appeared on this version of the work programme, apologies, but having spoken to the officers, they are aiming to launch the consultation in January, so they will come back to us shortly after that. And also there was a request to determine when the workshop would be held for the net zero plan, and that is next Wednesday, which I believe you're all already aware of. And For my own sanity, I checked, there looks to be a duplication in terms of temporary accommodation, the strategy and the policy, but I double checked and that is correct. They're going to ask that you approve the draft to go out for consultation at the March meeting, and then it will then come back again to committee once the final version is ready for approval.
Right. Thank you very much then. That's helpful. So we've got those additions there. I think on the tenants levy one, I think we should probably note that we will add that to the work programme explicitly, so that, because we agreed to do that before and it just needs actually doing. Okay, so we've got the work programme there. Any questions from any member of the committee? If not, then should we go to the usual? Oh, sorry, Councillor Norris.
Oh, thank you. Just with the interim asset management strategy coming in the March committee, we did say at the knowledge briefing, just to explicitly say that that includes the decarbonisation strategy.
I think that's a very
as part of the work.
Yeah, I think it's a very welcome addition, because we have asked on many occasions, what are we doing about net zero and when's it coming to the committee? So to say expressly, so if we modify that entry on the work plan, and leave that with you, Amanda, to do, if everyone's in agreement with that. So we're happy to approve the work programme with those, I think, 3 small amendments, just to try and keep us on track. Yes.
I think the interim asset management strategy will be a specific one for the asset management, so we can have 2 really big, so they are related, but I think we should have 2 separate ones for that. For the carbon one.
Yes, so 2 separate reports.
So the interim asset management strategy is specifically obviously looking at the programme in terms of how we carry out the investment programme over the next 12 to 18 months, and then there'll be a subsequent one that will come forward as a longer term asset management strategy. But I think what Councillor Norris is saying is we'll have a separate one for the carbon management as well.
Yeah, I'll just bring Councillor Norris back in there.
I think, let's see what would... Just talking about the workshop for the decarbonisation is one of the things we can talk about together is how that links to the interim asset management strategy and where things need to be integrated. So we could perhaps clarify that after that. We were thinking that stuff from the decarbonisation workshop could feed into the asset management workshop in March. So it's kind of linked.
Yeah, I think that will all come together. So for purposes of now, if unless there's anything more so, we can move that on. We could. I think we'll agree. We need to have a record of the net zero work and decarbonisation that's going to go on, but the asset management strategy will include some of that. But the further discussion, I think we can flesh out at the workshop that we've got scheduled for, I think, the 11th of December, and possibly we just need to have a record of that workshop on the work plan under the informal discussions, consultations and briefings. It is important to show people that we are doing the stuff on net zero that we've said we're going to do. So, okay. Amanda, I'll look to you to tidy those up, but I think with those recommendations, people are happy to approve that work plan and move on, because we have got enough on there now. Great, thank you very much. So, next item is on to the substantial ones. So, Jane, welcome here. You're moving up to do item 8. It's item 8. So, the budget monitoring position. So, I'll just leave you to take that through. If you want to just, of course, introduce yourself for the record, and thanks for putting your own name tag out.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Jane Wilby, Assistant Director of Finance and Accounting. And the paper that you've got is to provide the committee with an update on the financial position for the second quarter of 24-25, which includes 6 months of the accounts up to the 30th of September and a 6-month forecast to the end of the year. The full report was taken to the Finance and Performance Committee on the 18th of November. So the Council is forecasting a 34 million overspend against budget, which is approximately 7% of our net revenue budget. This position is driven by 3 main factors: funding reductions, increased demand and rising costs. We've experienced significant funding reductions across government, Sheffield has £858 less to spend per household in real terms compared to 2010-11, which is a reduction of 26%, which is well above the national average of 18%, or £556 per dwelling. We've also seen increased demand for services, particularly from our most vulnerable citizens, which continues to rise. We're also facing significant levels of inflation, which are impacting on our cost base. In response to the overspend, 34 million is a substantial overspend, and our officers are working diligently to develop solutions to reduce key areas of overspend. The position has remained stable from the Q1 outturn position, but targeted work from finance and service colleagues over the past quarter has helped us understand the drivers of the cost challenges and develop collaborative action plans. We're forecasting to deliver 40 million of the 42 million savings targets, achieving a 95% success rate in year. The main challenges remain in the budgets for adult social care, education, children and families, and housing, and the Finance and Performance Committee with significant overspends. These are primarily due to the rising costs and demands in adult social care, in home-to-school transport for children with special educational needs, and tackling increased homelessness. The Housing Committee, the General Fund is overspent by 5.2 million, which is an improvement on the Q1 outturn position. The overspend is related to the temporary nightly paid accommodation, where we cannot fully recover the costs via housing benefit from the DWP, which results in a shortfall. The number of households in temporary accommodation has decreased due to service improvements in prevention, assessment prior to placement, and weekly performance clinics to review individual cases. The number of presentations has stabilised, and there's been a marked improvement in moving out of bed and breakfast accommodations promptly. As of Q2, we were supporting 300 singles and 90 families, which is £600,000 less in the cost to the council compared to the prior quarter. By the end of the year, we anticipate to be supporting 100 singles and 5 families, with the ambition to reduce this to zero, expecting further improvements in the forecast throughout the rest of the year. From October, more housing has been made available by adjusting the allocation of social housing to prioritise those in need to make more use of the general needs stock accommodation. This has been enabled by the Voids Improvement Programme, which has reduced the number of empty properties. The Repairs and Maintenance Voids team has reorganised its resources to allow for efficient triaging of void properties, utilising best practice methods. This approach has led to a substantial increase in turnaround times and a reduction of historic backlogs. The housing revenue account, unfortunately, has had a knock-on impact on this, which is overspent by £4.8 million. The repairs and maintenance service in particular is 7.4 million overspent, which includes 5.1 million in subcontractor costs, 2.2 in materials and 2.3 million in agency staffing above budgeted levels. The actions to reduce this overspend include ensuring proper segregation of capital and revenue spend is accounted for, with a potential of 1.5 million improvement in revenue budgets to account for capital expenses this year. There are also investor save opportunities that we're looking at to increase staffing to reduce the reliance on subcontractors. They're also looking at ICT and productivity projects to review the service's ICT system capabilities, aiming to increase productivity. And this is part of the overall contract renewal and should drive productivity and reduce overdue repairs. On the whole, the Council's key response to financial challenges is the Future Sheffield programme, which is focused on transforming services to create a more sustainable and efficient operating model. Transformation is essential to ensure that we can continue delivering statutory services while supporting city growth. Our transformation efforts align with the Council's broader strategic goals and play a significant role in our budget setting process this year. Our medium-term financial strategy, which was published in July, identified a budget gap of 68.9 million over the next 4 years, with 31 million next year. The autumn statement from government indicated a 3.2% real-term increase in core spending for 25-26, which included a 4.99% council tax increase, which was better than our original planning assumptions. The government plans to reform funding allocations, starting with a targeted approach for 25-26, followed by a broader redistribution for 26-27, which should result in a clearer multi-financial year settlement, which would help with strategic planning and resource management. Services have worked hard to develop savings proposals to bridge next year's gap, and a full report will be presented to the Finance and Performance Committee on the 16th of December to present the current position. We expect to receive full details of the finance settlement around the same time, which will be worked through in January and presented to the Strategy and Resources Committee in February ahead of full council approval in March 25. So this paper is to note the current position at Q2. I'm happy to take any questions about the paper. Thank you.
Thank you very much for presenting that. I think digging there, there's several good news stories in a very challenging situation and also a very big budget. Just going to Councillor Jones, who's got a question written all over his face. What is it? What is your question?
I'm rubbish at poker. I never get away with anything. You were talking about families and individuals that we're supporting and saying that you'd get that down to 0. Being as this is, for want of a better phrase, a moving feast, as we help people, more people become needy or dependent upon our support. Can we ever get to 0? Is that ever a realistic goal?
Just to check, you're talking about the number of people in temporary accommodation that we're trying to reduce to 0, not the number of people we support. But
yes.
Yeah, okay. Is that... Suzanne, would you... Yeah, if you can give an answer to that, that would be really helpful, I think.
Yeah, I think I'd just start by saying I think it's our ambition to move to 0, and I think a lot of the actions that we've talked about in the paper and that Suzanne will probably talk about now is there's been an increased amount of prevention activity that's happening, so working with those families earlier to make sure that they don't reach the crisis point, so that the use of the temporary accommodation and bed and breakfast is the very much the last resort really when we haven't got that suitable stock to be able to fulfil the need. Working with families earlier gives us more of opportunity to sort of make sure that that doesn't happen. But Suzanne.
Hi, thanks. I'm Suzanne Allen, Head of Citywide Housing Services. I'm responsible for our homelessness services. So the devil is in the detail, actually. We will always have people who need temporary housing. It's a statutory duty that we must fulfil that emergency safety net for people who are absolutely entitled to that help. Our ambition is to not use bed and breakfast and hotel type accommodation for those households. We are prioritising reducing the numbers of families with children, particularly who are living in one room with their children, but it's for everyone who might need that we're talking about an ambition to get to 0. That's both for them, but also for the council. That's where we've got the biggest implication on the budget of losing money because of the hostel subsidy, housing benefit subsidy rules. And what we want to make sure is where people have that requirement, they are housed in appropriate accommodation temporarily. We assess their needs, make decisions, and have more of a rapid rehousing model so they're not stuck in temporary type accommodation. So that will be a priority to move away from hotels for many reasons, including our obligation to comply with the statutory guidance on families, which is they should not be in a hotel for more than 42 days or bed and breakfast type accommodation. Therefore, what we will be doing, and Amanda alluded to it, is bringing forward a temporary accommodation strategy for members to consider, which will set out how we will get to that point of firstly, moving away from hotels, and secondly, having the right range of provision in place. But just having more and more provision isn't the answer. That's where the prevention agenda sits alongside that, to make sure if we can anticipate that risk, help people either to stay where they are or have a planned move, our performance gets better. And that isn't just the council, that's all the partners we work with as well, whether it's internal partners like social care colleagues, community safety, police, commission services, and voluntary sector, great groups of community-based services that work to support people. So it's that holistic approach, really, Mark. And we're not saying, like, today we'll just be able to sort of do a numbers game. Does that help explain that point?
Thank you. I think that's good, isn't it? I mean, let's perhaps not go into all the homelessness prevention, because that's another item we have discussed before and we'll discuss again. Did you have any further question, or because we've got a number of other people with questions?
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. I was a little bit anxious that we might also be looking to set aside properties that we deliberately leave vacant when we wouldn't need to. So we've got capacity, but the strategy you've got there, and actually the response that you've given is really, really helpful. because it does show that we recognise the issues and the causes of the issues, and we're moving it forward. So thank you for that. That's really helpful. Thanks, Chair.
Right, thank you. Yeah, okay. A number of other questions. Anyone specifically on temporary accommodation? If not, so just go for Councillor Hooper first of all. Sorry, Hooper. The other one. Alan Woodcock. Councillor Woodcock. Eventually we'll get there.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to know how many voids have been brought back into use. Do we have a figure for that?
Is anyone able to answer that now? Actually, over to you.
Yeah, I can't give you a precise answer, but I think one of the things that we've been working really hard on as part of the housing transformation programme is, one of them is homelessness, and the other one is about how quickly we can bring some of our properties back into use. And you'll remember many times that in council discussions there's been this figure around 1,000 properties that have been vacant across the city. You'll be pleased to know that we've been making some real inroads into that through the work that we've been doing in terms of addressing that. So we've probably made about a 25% inroad into that number now, and I'll be able to give you precise figures, after the meeting if that's what the committee would like. But the direction of travel is going in the right way, and our expectation is that as we do more work in this area, that will reduce and be more in line with our peers. But there's a fair bit of work to do yet, but it's going in the right direction.
Thank you.
Thanks, yeah. And to be fair, I think actually the increase in getting more voids back into use is probably reflected in the fact that the income from rents has gone up, has come in a bit in a better position than budget, if you look at page 46 there on the table, which is quite helpful. Great, good question. Councillor Chaplin, you'll go.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Jane, for the report. I'm just trying to make sense of the paragraph on ICT and productivity at the bottom of page 47. The very last sentence, a separate software trial has been completed and expected efficiencies were not delivered, so it was discontinued. That's understandable. Does that mean that basically because of that we're sticking with the renewing the total mobile contract to try and mitigate this, or are you looking at other ways to get efficiencies? I just wasn't sure whether those two sentences were linked or not.
And I think they are linked in the sense that, there's a programme to make sure that we are looking at the data and understanding the systems and the capabilities that we've got within the systems we have currently got. The trial was probably, I don't know the details about it, but clearly linked to that productivity work and investing in our ICT and digital to make sure that we're getting the most out of what we've got. So, yeah, I think that obviously that separate trial has been undertaken to see whether there was something else that we wanted to do in addition to pursuing with the total mobile, further opportunities within the contract that we've already got. And I think it's just been decided that we're just going to focus on the technology that we've currently got to drive some productivity gains out of that. I don't know whether Ajman's got any further information that you'd like to share around the work with total mobile and the recontracting opportunities.
Not a huge amount of detail, but this was, I think, where we wanted to see if that product could actually look at where sometimes you go into properties for repeat jobs, for example, or duplicate jobs, and it's a better way to be able to analyse that data and then give the team an opportunity to be able to look at improvements. So that was the trial that we were trialling with Total Mobile. We do still use Total Mobile, but this was another product that they had to enable us to be able to factor in any wastage, any efficiencies, any duplications. That's what that trial was about.
Any further questions?
Yeah, if I could just follow up. I'm a bit concerned because I believe from what I've heard from various places, it may or may not be true, is that some of the software that some of our officers are working with is comparatively old, and it's not always throwing up the information that's needed, so that we can either get jobs done, particularly on repairs. But you may have some information on that.
Yeah, risk of setting myself up on about technology. I think the issue is that the total mobile platform, as I understand it, was introduced a couple of years ago as a new tool. So I think there was some issues around the implementation of that and training, etc. So the team's been working with Total Mobile to make sure that all its functionality can be utilised and the team are fully equipped to be able to do that. That's always sometimes a problem, isn't it? Because sometimes you get a product and if you're not using it properly or you've had all the training, etc., then you think, well, this doesn't work quite right. And I think there's an element of that. So the team have been working really closely with our suppliers to make sure that they've got the right training, right skills and know how to use it. And there may have been some teething problems before, but I think it is working better now. But we have got support from external providers to help us in that journey.
Thanks. I mean, I guess the reflection on that is that actually getting these IT systems right and having the right tools for the job are really key to driving all the performance improvements that will lead to cost savings. It's right to ask about that. Okay, I'll come back to you. I'll take Councillor Williams. Is this your first housing committee? It is. Well, Councillor Williams, over to you. It doesn't count as making a speech.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just coming back to something you highlighted in your report, which was the income being higher than anticipated. And you said it's 1.3 million due to vacant rent loss, which I guess is voids coming back in service, and anticipated bad debt. Is there a split of that figure? Or could you provide a split of that figure at some point? And also, just in terms of bad debts, is that's money owed that's written off that we're never going to get back? Is that right?
Happy to provide the breakdown of that number after the meeting. I don't have that to hand, unfortunately. But yeah, the bad debt, I think we have a provision for bad debt in our that's set against income. So it basically, provides a little bit of contingency for those that don't pay. But actually, we've seen payment levels be better than anticipated. So the level of bad debt is not as high as we'd expected, which is where that improvement comes from.
That's helpful. Which page were you on? You can do. Yeah. Which page were you on with that? Just so
Page 47.
Page 47, right.
3.16.
So you still have that reference, yeah. And just check, Jane, were you able to circulate that to maybe to all the members of the committee? It's a good question. Councillor Williams, over to you.
Yeah, just really regarding the bad debt, is it just chance that it's fluctuated, or is there any reason that you're aware of that why bad debt isn't as bad as you thought it might be?
It's always quite a science to get the bad debt provision correct, to be perfectly honest. And I think since coming out of COVID and obviously the cost of living crisis that we've had, we've had to look at our bad debt provisions across the board in terms of income collection. So it's something that I think we tend to err on the side of caution when we are setting budgets based on anticipated behaviour and where we think we're going to achieve certain income levels. But we do review that on an annual basis, and we do agree appropriate methodology with our auditors as well, so that they're comfortable that we've got the right level of provisions in place.
Great, thank you. Okay, Councillor Norris, I think you had a question.
I've got a couple and they're quite short, so I ask them together. Yeah. One is just on page 39, the overall budget. Our housing variance has reduced, so actually 400,000 better off than we thought. Where's that come from? I think I've got a bit of a clue from some of the questions that have been asked. And then the other thing is that we're now adopting a priority-based budgeting approach, and I just wondered what that was in more detail.
So yes, you're right, in terms of the improvement in the Housing General Fund, it has come from some of the actions that we talked about with the temporary accommodation and the move to utilise some of the housing stock we've got, the turnaround in voids. So we've been able to reduce the number of singles and the number of families that we're supporting with nightly paid accommodation. So that reduction has had that direct impact with the full year financial forecast position. And as I kind of mentioned in the report, we are aiming to be at zero. And I think, as Suzanne said, the ambition is to be at zero using nightly paid accommodation by the end of the year, or as low as absolutely possible. So I think we anticipate that we might see some further improvements in that forecast towards the rest of the quarters throughout the rest of the year. So that's where the improvements come from, which is a really positive news story. The priority-based budgeting model. So What we've adopted this year really is we've gone through a process of looking at each of our individual budget lines and looking at how well they align to the outcomes that we want to deliver as part of the council plan. So we've kind of gone through a methodology where we've scored every single budget line in terms of alignment to the plan, the sort of whether the impact of non-delivery of the service, and also a bit about how well the service delivers in terms of utilisation of its financial resources, so whether it's an overspend or underspend position. So a combination of factors has kind of given us the ability to score certain areas, which the scoring system has then enabled us to sort of look at areas of opportunity where we think actually we might be able to do things a little bit differently, or there might be opportunities to make savings within the budget. So this is mapped exactly alongside the way that we normally do the budgeting process, whereby we set the medium-term financial strategy and we look at what funding that we think is going to be available to us, and we also look at what pressures are coming forward in terms of demand pressures, cost pressures. We match the two, and then we look to see how we're going to balance that gap. The priority-based budgeting scoring system has enabled us to really set that alongside some of the savings proposals that have come through, to see whether actually there's a real good fit in some of those savings or investment opportunities, to make sure that we're delivering on the outcomes within our council plan, and we're also delivering value for money in terms of financial effectiveness. So it's been another tool really to make sure that we're doing the right thing and we're actually ensuring good value for money, rather than just naturally rolling forward budgets, naturally, you know, in some cases rolling forward inefficiencies in certain areas. So it's been it's been quite a journey, I think, for the finance team. There's been an absolutely huge amount of work that's gone on behind the scenes that you've not seen. Well, some of you may have seen this, but it's been quite a really useful exercise this year, and I think that we'll continue to build on that in future years and really sort of bring that out even more.
Thank you, that's a helpful overview. Councillor Baker, did you have a question about community heating, or shall I raise this point? Do you want to speak on it?
Sorry, Chair. I asked the question in our knowledge briefing, and asked where the community heating charges were, because we couldn't find any comment about it. And I was actually waiting for an email or something to tell us what it was, but good opportunity, Chair. Yeah.
Well, I just thought we were going to flag it up here. So it's referred
It's easy
to
enough
page
to do it here
48
because it's on this. Yeah.
So the good news is the account is broadly balanced, so it's a ring fence and a ring fence. But the question is, do we actually have to make a decision in this committee to either put up, put down, or keep the same the heating charges? So
That's the advice.
Yeah.
That's the advice we were expecting. Yeah. So the question is, it's broadly balanced. We're pleased with that. Are we happy that if we leave the charges as they are at the moment, it will carry on covering the cost of the heating, or is there a need to increase that charge?
Yeah, thank you. I just find you.
I've never heard the budget being described as a beautiful process before. Fantastic. Just onto your question, Councillor Baker. The last time this was increased was in October 22. So, as I understand it, rather than coming through the business plan process, there's usually a separate paper that comes through, and that's what happened back then. And officers tell me that they're not anticipating an increase at the moment, but if and when that does happen, there'd be a paper that would come through to get that approval.
So to clarify, Chair, it's coming as an individual item itself. It's something we always expected in October, you see. So fair enough. We've changed the system so we know that a paper will be brought if it's needed to increase it, but otherwise maintain the level it is. It'll stay as it is. Yeah.
Thanks. I think that's helpful. Just having a quick bit of advice from our legal officer here. Thinking about, so we don't need to do anything other than note that, because I think we can see where we're going. There's no reason to have to change the community heating charges, but let's bear that in mind. It's something that wants wrapping up at some point. Do you want to come back on that?
Just to say, Chair, we have had an increase from interest at one time through a member of the public asking that similar questions. But I never saw a written answer to it, which I presumed, which I understood the member of the public was going. So that was another thing that brought the thought up. It's very good if we can maintain the levels and don't have to put them up for 2 or 3 years for our tenants. That's really good news.
I think it's something that we also need to keep under review, and presumably we'll formally have a decision on in the actual budget setting process, presumably when the housing revenue account comes to full council on the first Wednesday in February. But let's just bear that in mind, yeah. Should we go over to Councillor Chamberlain?
Yes, it's just exploring this a bit further now that Councillor Baker has raised it. I think tenants would be concerned if we were currently, because obviously the fuel prices needed for to run these district heating systems are related to the fuel market, the wider fuel market. And there's just a concern there that are we currently overcharging our tenants for the district heating systems? There may not be enough answers here today, but I think that's something that might be worth looking at in a briefing. Chair.
But thanks. I mean, I think it would be sensible to keep an eye on that. But in terms of the simple question of are we overcharging, it might be an answer we can get. We can get a short answer from the officers, which I hope will be no. But let's ask them. Ajman, are you able to give an answer to whether we're overcharging tenants?
Well, we wouldn't overcharge tenants because what we would normally do is if there is I'll check this out, but if there was a credit in the account, then people should get a refund at the appropriate time. So it should balance itself out, really. The intention isn't to overcharge necessarily, but what I'll do is, given the interest, I'll make sure that we talk to the relevant people and finance colleagues to make sure that we give you a written answer, so we're absolutely clear in terms of the process. But that's my understanding as it stands at the moment. Thank you,
Thanks.
Chair.
I mean, I think it probably is important to stress that this is a ring-fenced account, isn't it? So it's paid in by the tenants who have community heating, and it's only paid for that heating. So if there's any surplus in there, it's in their account, so they'll get it back at some point, which I guess we usually do by not having to put up charges if we don't need to. So, you know, hope that's okay. Let's keep an eye on that one. We had, Councillor Jones, do you want to come back for a second round?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It was just a brief inquiry. It says on 3.1.10, pay-as-you-go income is forecast to be less than expected for the community heating account, which is broadly balanced. I know you're going to bring another paper, so it's maybe not a thing for here, but it would be helpful to have in that paper an exploration of, is that pay-as-you-go heating down because people can't afford it, or they're anxious about paying their bills going forward? It'd be good to understand whether maybe we're just, it's a better climate because it's warmer at the moment, so people aren't using as much, or whether there's more significant social impact that we need to be aware of there.
So that's perhaps a need to include some. I mean, if you could take this away and make sure that we get a briefing note on it, that's probably helpful to address all those things there. Keen not to have a second round of things because we've got a few other items on the agenda. Are people broadly happy with that? As if so, we've got the recommendation, as James indicated at the start, really just to note the contents of this report, and I think we probably don't need any other further recommendations. People happy to do that? Yeah, that was a unanimous thing. Great, well thank you very much. Thanks for the presentation. Should we move on to the next item, which is the finance and performance, well, Q2 performance monitoring. So it's really about performance. So, are you okay? Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah. Ajman, you're the one who's not leaving the table, so yes, yeah. Over to you, I think. Is your mic? What happens if you were on a moment ago, I think? Oh, right, okay. Right. So just for anyone else, so we're on page 35. sorry, not on page 35, we're on the next report entirely. We're on page 53. So, there we are.
Thank you, Chair. I think ordinarily Chris Ellison would have presented this report. Unfortunately, he's not been able to attend, so you'll have to put up with me, and probably might not do as good a job as he would have done, but there we go, we'll try my best. But I think the pleasing thing to say here is that, unlike previous times, we're beginning to see an improvement in performance across the vast majority of the areas that we are tracking, and that's set out in the appendix that you've got. So I think that's a good news story in terms of the direction of travel, but that doesn't mean to say that we can rest on our laurels. We've got to continue to work harder and smarter to make sure that we perform even better and are best in class. So what this report is setting out is the performance across the housing piece for Q2. That's the period up to July to September of this year. And the report's structured around three main landlord commitments and also the tenant satisfaction measures which are required to be undertaken as part of our regulatory requirements, as well as linking into the council plan outcomes as well. So those broad three areas are really around how having quality homes, how we provide quality homes, how we take care of our neighbourhoods, and how we provide a good service. The targets for the TSM measures, they are benchmarked with some of our peer groups, and that's set out in the report in terms of the organisations that we benchmark against. And we also share some of this data with our residents. That's really important that they can see the direction of travel and improvement and have an opportunity to challenge some of that as well. In terms of the performance itself, I think it's fairly self-explanatory in the appendix. All of the areas, really pleased to see that, as I said, they're going in the right direction compared to previous areas. So perhaps some notable ones really around improvement in tenant satisfaction around repairs. That's seen a 7% increase. Improvements around emergency responses. That's also had an increase. Satisfaction around people feeling that their homes are safe. Satisfaction around communal areas that are well maintained, so that's been improving. People particularly pleased around how they can contact us, but more importantly, when they do contact us, that they're treated fairly and with respect by the teams. Complaints, isn't quite where it should be, but it's going in the right direction. It's not to the standard that we'd expect, but that's something I think a lot of housing providers are finding challenging in terms of trying to meet some of those complaint targets. Some of the reasons perhaps why we're making those improvements, there's a real desire for the teams to work hard on this area, so the whole of the teams across housing, repair service are working together. There's a huge amount of management oversight going into this, and we regularly are scrutinising that data and that information and challenging ourselves. And some of the policies that you've approved, for example, the repairs policy, the approvals that you made around getting additional contractors, so we're increasing our gas operatives, for example, and other staff, bringing external specialists. All of those things that you've agreed to help us to be able to make some of those changes are beginning to see results, and I expect that as we get those colleagues in, as we get the contractors fully mobilised and driving some of these improvements, we should see more of that coming forward. So that's some of the key reasons, I think, why things are moving in the right direction. We're getting some feedback from our residents in terms of what they think is important in the communal areas, and the estate teams are looking at using some of that feedback to be able to make sure that they identify improvements. And you'll have seen as part of the budget process that we put in some requests for some additional resources to be able to help those teams to be able to make further improvements in the locality. We're using feedback from mystery shoppers to be able to help inform some of the feedback that they get and build that into the programme as well. And teams are doing neighbourhood walkabouts, and I'm sure we get feedback from members as well, to tell us what their neighbourhoods are like. I personally go out and about on walkabouts in neighbourhoods and see what's happening. So there's a whole triangulation of information coming through, both in terms of the data, both in terms of responses from customers, by the way, which is independently verified, so through surveys by an independent company, not by our own staff, and feedback that we're getting and complaints, etc. All of that information is giving, consistent messages in terms of that direction of travel, which is set out in that appendix. So, Chair, I think, rather than dwelling any further on that, I think it's fairly self-explanatory report, and the appendix is fairly self-explanatory as well. So I'll take questions from members and try and answer some of those. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think, first of all, it's important to say this is actually really positive that for a second quarter in a row we've seen a substantial evidence of trend across almost all those measures there. So we should probably say a big thanks to all the hundreds of staff who are involved in making this happen. Also our tenants and tenant reps who've come up with constructive feedback, and the fact that, of course, we have through this committee put in a lot of extra money into focusing on some of the big jobs there. So questions. So I'll go to Councillor Turpin, who hasn't yet spoken this meeting.
Thanks. So I guess firstly, I'm always a bit, the tenant satisfaction figures I take with a pinch of salt, because we don't know how many people have been asked or how they've been asked or when they've been asked, and also the targets of 60-odd% is, well, look how close we are to it. Oh well, if the target was 70%, we'd be further away, or vice versa. So I appreciate things are looking all right, but I kind of find the harder data more a better reflection of where the service is. So I'm looking at page 4 of Appendix 1, which has the EICR electrical safety, electrical installation condition reports and an EPC and stuff. And so on questions on this sheet is, I think it was the last committee meeting we had recently, we approved the procurement of some external contractors to bring the council houses up to date with their electrical safety certificates. So obviously this is something that's been dropping down, and that's perfectly understandable as they're directly related to time, and time passes. Is there an update on where that procurement is, firstly? Secondly, the next box is the percentage of council homes with an EPC rating C or better. That has remained the same on the 3 bars, more or less. So I'm wondering if that is going to be dealt with sooner than we get the completed stock survey work done, or if that's linked to something else. And finally, the third box, time to re-let empty council homes, average number of days. And so that has come down from last year, but I would say it's still persistently high. And I know you said earlier on the previous section that number of voids are coming down. Did we not establish a special team to tackle the voids and to bring them back into service, or have I made that up? Yeah, maybe I'll just let you have a go at answering those 3 questions, if that's all right.
Thanks very much. Yeah. So we're on page 68 of the report, aren't we?
Yeah. So I think the electrical contractors have been mobilised. So that procurement has been undertaken. So they will start to deal with some of those electrical works and make sure that we get back to target as soon as possible. So that's in train. It's happening. Yes, so it's happening. It's going to take some time to do, because there's quite a number to get through. So they've been mobilised, procurement has been done, and we'll be able to see improvements, as the work gets through over the next weeks and months going through. And you should see some of that coming through in the next iteration of this report. Okay. In terms of the EPC rating, I think we've got some budgets in the capital programme around carbon reduction, etc. I think we're still probably better than quite a number of other authorities in terms of the number of properties that we've got to EPC C standard, but we'll be aiming to make sure that we improve that over the course of the next few years, certainly trying to get to that level by 2030, I think, which is one of the targets that we've set. And in terms of the empty properties, I did caveat my introduction in terms of saying that the direction of travel is going in the right way. There's more work that needs to be done. Empty properties and void relet times isn't best in class. There's a significant amount we need to do. There is a team. There isn't necessarily one team. It's lots of people are working on this across, Suzanne's area, across repairs, across asset management, housing management, to make sure that the processes are as seamless as they possibly can be, and everybody is doing their bit as quickly as they possibly can to make sure that figure reduces. So if everybody works in the method that they're working at the moment, again, you should start to see those numbers reducing going forward.
Thanks very much. Yeah, okay, that. Further questions?
Just very quickly. I mean, I appreciate, should start seeing those numbers going down. Like, I mean, they've gone up slightly since the last quarter. I guess we're just going to have to wait to see the next quarter's figures, aren't we, and see how it's going. But it's obviously something that's really important to us, and has been discussed quite a lot for various reasons.
So there's two things to point out there, I think. One is that because some of these properties have been in the system for such a long time, when you do let them, that the total length of time still stays quite high, but the actual number of properties that you've got in the system reduces. So it won't be until all of those long-term properties that have been in the system for many, many months, some of them for years, have all been dealt with, you'll see some real difference in the actual number of that target date. But what's important is, I think, that the number of properties that we've got vacant and available to let goes down as quickly as possible. And that's what we're seeing because of the work that we're doing. And there's a number of benefits for that, obviously, as Jane mentioned, in terms of the additional income that we're getting in from that, and the fact that we can relet some of those properties much more quickly, having an impact on the work that Suzanne's team are doing as well. So it's not just one clear-cut answer. There's a number of different elements to that, just to be clear. Thank you.
Thanks, yeah. I think, as Councillor Turpin said, it's sometimes you need to look at the hard numbers, because an average can disguise a few factors there. And just got a comment too, of course, it'd be interesting to look at on the graph about the EPC certificates. It'd be very interesting if we had a comparison there with the private rented sector. So people are not living in council homes just because, whereas the charts here are well above 80%. I think in the private rent sector it's below 20%, and that looked very stark on this graph. Just a quick plug for council housing. All right, Richard, Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I was going to ask you a point about the relets, but Councillor Turpin has beaten me to it, and thank you for that. It's just, overall, this is clearly a picture for the whole of Sheffield. My concern would be that within that, there are going to be black spots that hopefully we know about, but we're not getting that information about. I mean, for example, I've got places in Stannington Ward where the tenants would be surprised at some of this level of performance. I mean, I assume we are looking at where the black spots are and focusing on those as well.
Yeah, the beauty about having this level of data is that we can start to interrogate it at area level, team levels, etc. So where there are, it's not common, for example, there's an outlier, then we can actually make sure that we can target resources into those areas. So they're also things that we're looking at. And one of the just things to bear in mind is this huge amount of work that's been done both in housing service and in the council in terms of making sure that we get good quality performance data. This is something that hasn't always been available. So across the council, we've been able to make sure this gets into the system. So that's really important. But we're getting much better at it, and we can drill down on it and make sure that we can target results accordingly.
Thank you. And that's possibly prefigures the next item, which is the Housing Revenue Account Business Plan. So, yeah, good question there. Go to Councillor Chaplin now.
Yes, I welcome this report and welcome the fact that we're seeing so many indicators going in the right direction. I do appreciate there will be some properties where it's difficult to gain access, difficult to communicate with tenants, and some of our tenants can be, for want of a better word, transitory in nature. But to gain 1% there, looking at that page with the EPC ratings of C or better, you've had a 1% shift in a quarter. If you can manage that each quarter, then you should get to 100% in just over 4 years. So I think what's so pleasing is that we're looking at a number of indicators where they are at last generally going in the right direction, whereas it's been much more patchy in recent years.
Thank you, sir. A fair comment there. Do you have anyone else asking questions? Yes, Councillor Drozek.
Yeah, it's all really good, and I don't want to pick up on bad points necessarily, but when it came to the call centre, even though the satisfaction was going up, I was noticing that the waiting time was also going up, and also we were dropping on how many calls we were answering, and I just wanted to query why, or if we had a reason.
Well picked out. That is something that we're working on. I mean, we've had some call centre staff, you always have quite high turnover. That's always a challenge, I think. So we have had a high turnover of staff, which has meant sometimes that calls have dropped off. We're looking at putting more resources into that team. But also it's all about making sure that they've got the tools to be able to, online information, etc. And so our digital work that we're doing as part of the broader council will help to make sure that they can have the information to hand, that they can deal with calls quite quickly, customers can self-serve, etc. Also, sometimes, customers are chasing repairs. So if we can get better at dealing with the repairs in the first place, then there's less need for customers to chase. So that's another area that we're working on, making sure that things are done at the front end, so that the people only have to ring up for the genuine repairs that they need to report, as well as making sure that they can have access online. But one of the main reasons is that there has been staff turnover in that team, and we're trying to focus our attention to dealing with that.
Thank you very much. Yeah, okay with that. Good question. You see, this committee has many eyes on things. All right, Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Adjumant, for this. Most of the things on here are really, really positive, and I guess picking up on some of my colleagues' questions as well, I think the element about granularity of the data presented is always going to be difficult, because in this format, if you make the data too detailed, then it becomes impossible for others to necessarily interrogate and understand. I guess the way that the bar graphs are presented is quite simplistic. If you had a scatter plot in there with individual data points showing outliers, we'd be able to focus on some of them, but I'm not sure that would necessarily help the conversation here. Maybe that's for another session, another time, because focusing on an individual property within the area, though instructive on that property, doesn't necessarily help the wider strategy. I guess that's what we're talking about here. We've heard the phrase several times already about best in class. And I'm kind of mindful, we know the comparators that we're up against, and some of the targets we're hitting. So I'm guessing we would probably look going forward, keeping those lines in of our comparator authorities, but also where we would then be going, where we're exceeding, because I'm assuming we're not going to sit on our laurels and be happy we've hit that. But if you were talking about best in class, and we're talking about a particular class now of Kirklees and the rest, I think it was, I can't remember exactly. Which authorities would you want to be exceeding, or do you just want to be the best in the country? So there's an ambition there and kind of understanding of the direction we want to go in that I think you could maybe give us a brief insight into. One of the things that does concern me a little bit here, and maybe you could explain more on, is the percentage of homes meeting the Decent Homes Standard. That's sort of gone in the wrong direction recently, but I'm not sure whether that's just stock improvements, whether that drags stuff in and then gives us artefacts within the accountancy bits. Paul asked the really good questions on EPCC, so I'll not go back over any of those parts there. There was one final part I was thinking on the tenant satisfaction survey. I know Maya's already mentioned some of these points already, and that's quite helpful. It appears that when people get through to us, they're happy with the responses. which is surprising because if you're ringing us, you're not happy, and then to leave them happy is good. So are we content that we've got enough people in the call centre? Have we got enough skills of those people within the call centres to meet everything we've got? There's quite a lot there, so I'll shut up now, Chair.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it's just in terms of, which authorities we want to beat, if you like. I'm not sure that Ashman can really answer that. But the really interesting point made about the decent homes. So, I mean, maybe we could focus on that, and then we'll perhaps try and shift the conversation into the HRA business plan, if you like.
Okay, I'm glad I came. So I think best in class, it would be great to be best in class, and we need to measure against our comparators. So there's different peer groups, and that's been set out in the report. So that's one group that we can measure against. We do also get benchmarking data from organisations like Housemart, where we can see in terms of how we're performing against other comparable authorities. I mean, it's probably worth thinking about comparing ourselves with the core cities, for example. Because they might have similar issues as we have. We won't rest on our laurels. One of the first things I said before I started my presentation, that's not what it's about. The regulator will also publishes, the tenant satisfaction measures that we submitted early in the year. So all landlords need to submit that data, so we can actually start to look at, well, where do we rank in relation to those measures compared to others, and then start to set our stall accordingly relating to that. So that's what we'll be doing. Next year when it's at the target, we'll look at those, we'll look at other comparators and target accordingly. If you want to drill down the detail, I would suggest that we do those in another working group, and happy to be able to facilitate for the team to come together to look at individual wards, individual areas, and see where that takes us. It's not a problem. The decent homes has gone in the wrong direction. So I think it was about 3% in figures there. That's relating to the fact that sometimes investment hasn't happened in some of those properties. But I think now that we've started the stock condition surveys, which again this committee approved for 2 organisations that have been procured to do that, that will give us some better data in terms of what the condition of those properties are. And we may find that there'll be more pressures on the budgets, depending on what the outcome of that is. So until we get that information through, that number may fluctuate. And we will need to make sure that we target our resources accordingly to make sure that we deal with that. What else did you ask?
I think that covers
most
things.
All of it. I think that covered it. Yep. Thank you.
Thanks very much then, and thanks everyone for the questions. So, Professor, there's quite a lot to be pleased about there, but as Ajman says, absolutely not resting on laurels. There's still a long way to go of continuous improvement there. So the recommendation is just to note that report, which we've had. We've asked the questions. There's plenty more that will be following up in those briefings, as Councillor Jones mentioned. Do we want to sort of add something on about the fact that this is the second quarter where there's been sustained improvement, and it's not down to us sitting here, it's the people doing the work here. Do we want to convey a note of thanks to all the staff involved in a second quarter's improvement? Yep.
I don't want to be down on the staff, because I do appreciate the mammoth task, and I appreciate the good work that they do, but not every metric has improved. I think that we have to be careful of being honest.
Well, yeah, it's true. Broadly, though, I think we've all accepted that broadly, then things are moving in the right direction. So no one's saying it's perfect, and no one's saying that everything is okay. But it is, I think everyone's agreed that things are broadly moving in the right direction. And we've rightly pulled out some of the others there. Yeah, Councillor Baker, yes.
Chair, you and I had a conversation at a previous meeting of something we wish to do at the end of the meeting. Perhaps we could include it in that.
That is actually a really good suggestion. Let's just park that thought. And so if we're happy to just note the report, that deals with the recommendation, doesn't it? And let's hold those good thoughts there. Should we move on to the next item? Yeah, I assume that's done unanimously. Yeah, good nods there. Yeah. So if we move on to the HRA business accountant business plan, which follows on nicely from this. I guess we're going to turn to you, Ajman. You're still in the hot seat, so there we are. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So this is the annual report that you get in terms of approving the HRA business plan, and the reports in there, and each year we need to review that, both in terms of, you know, the capital programme that we're going to have both in the short to medium term over the next 5 years, but also over the next 30 years as well. And it also sets out some of the key areas that we want to focus on. So it's a ring-fenced account, which members will be aware of for both the income and the expenditure of the council. And it's quite restricted in terms of what we can spend the money on, so most of you will know that. That's been on the committee for some time. We need to spend the money on delivering our repairs, our capital programme, tenant improvements to our 38,000 council homes across the city. As I've said, it's reviewed each year, and we need to make sure that looking over the 30-year period, it's affordable, it's sustainable. One thing I would mention is that this year what we've done is we've commissioned an external consultancy to help us and have a look at our long-term business plan and sort of help us in terms of making sure that, you know, all the information that we put in there is viable, and give us some advice and support on that. And so this year's business plan should be taken in the context of a longer, broader piece of work that's been done, and I'd sort of badge it as an interim business plan, if you like, for 26. There's a few factors to think about. So the consumer standard is something new that's come through this year, and you'll know that the regulator has been making judgments across the country for social landlords, and we got our rating earlier in the year where we were rated a C3, so there's quite a lot to do in terms of dealing with the safety and quality standards and making sure that our investment programme deals with and is informed by good quality data and information, hence why we're accelerating the stock condition survey, which, as I say, you've approved. There's also things like new decent home standards in the pipeline, which the government has been working on. Don't know the full details of that yet. That will be emerging next year. And lots of compliance issues around building safety, fire safety, which creates demand on the service. So it's each year we always get this pressure. There's always a pressure on the HRA, and each year we need to make savings. This year you'll have seen some of those pressures, and again some of the savings that need to be made. Total income in the region of about £188 million on the rent roll. So, you know, it's a big business, if you like, in terms of the service. And each year, sometimes those pressures and budget gaps become difficult to manage, and difficult decisions need to be made. What the document also sets out in the appendix is badged as priorities, but perhaps having 15 items badged priorities is probably not a priority. So I'd kind of describe it perhaps as, you know, some of the key aims that we want to achieve over the next 12 months. Clearly, we've had a good conversation just now about improving repairs. Things like damp mould is really important, managing disrepair claims, reducing empty properties, all of those things that we've been talking about. That's important to yourselves and residents. So they're set out in the report, and I think you've had early sight of that. So what we may do after the meeting is think about whether we badge them as priorities or whether we have a small number of priorities, but have stated aims in terms of what we're going to try and achieve over the next 12 months. Just in terms of financials, and I know we've looked at the budget for this year, but the forecast for next year is that we'll get around £188 million worth of income. Most of that will come through dwellings, from 38,000 dwellings, but then we do get a smaller amount of income coming from other investments. We have shops and things like that in the neighbourhoods and businesses that get additional income, garages and so on. So we're projecting that we'll get 188 million. Obviously, one of the things that we've got at the moment is that we've got a 5-year rent settlement that the government's announced, so working on CPI plus 1%. So that gives us some confidence in terms of, what the future income stream is going to look like, and the forecast for the next 5 years has been based on that CPI plus 1% increase year on year. In terms of, so that's the money coming in. Well, where does the money go? Most of that goes on repairs and maintenance and housing management, tenant services, as well as making sure that we do our capital program and paying the mortgage, the interest on the mortgage, as it were. So if you look at the appendix, you'll see that for next year, we're spending around £63 million on repairs, and we're proposing to do around £48 million on capital investment. So, well in excess of £100 million still going into our stock. So it's a sizable amount of investment going in to deal with our properties. That might change, so that's what we've got for work going forward for next year. And as I say, when the stock condition surveys come back, we'll need to reflect on that, and those numbers might change going forward. There's a bit of detail in the appendix as well in terms of, well, where does that money get spent? So it's broken down by, decarbonisation, component replacement, heating, mechanical, electrical work, building safety, some money going to Gleadless Valley. So we've tried to break that down in some detail in the expenditure item, and there's some detail in the business plan itself. So that kind of summarises in terms of money coming in, money going out, what are the key areas that we want to prioritise. If you look ahead 30 years, over the 30-year period, we probably forecast to spend well over £2 billion over that 30-year period. And there's more certainty in the early years, there's less certainty as you go further down the line. And that includes dealing with long-term life cycle replacements, looking at additional investment such as fire, building safety, energy efficiencies. Also thinking about that net zero. Well, what's that figure going to be? How much do we need to spend on that? It's an important number that we're not quite sure in terms of what that will entail. When you take all that into account, the numbers thrown up suggest that we are spending a forecast to spend around £56,000 per property over that period. Some commentators will say that's probably might be on the slightly low side. We might need to spend a bit more. Again, once the stock condition survey comes back, we'll have a clear idea whether that is the right amount or whether we might need to spend more on our properties over the next 30 years. So we won't know that detail until we get that information. So once we get that, we know the money that we have to spend on that, is essentially repairs, some borrowing, capital receipts, but the bulk of it comes from rent and some grants from the government. So we'll utilise all of that to be able to spend on our capital programme. But as the years go further down the line, we think there might be a bit of a gap. How we're going to plug that gap? Borrowing is one option, but when you do borrow, you've got to make sure that you've got enough resources to be able to pay that back. So there's some challenges there over the longer term. So once we've got the asset management strategy developed, once we've got the data to inform that, that will set out what that plan might look like. There's the government policy in terms of rent. I've mentioned that it's set for the next 5 years. There's consultation out at the moment. Most people in the sector would say 5 years is great, but we'd like 10 years so we can plan a bit longer in terms of into the future. We've seen some changes in the right to buy. That should ease in terms of the numbers that we get, but we have had a significant increase before the deadline was hit in terms of numbers coming through. And I was on a call with approximately 60 or 70 of the councils yesterday, and everybody has been experiencing similar increases in terms of the numbers to meet that 21st of November deadline. So that will play out, and hopefully that will reduce the numbers going forward. The benefit of that, of course, is that we'll have less properties being sold, so more income coming in. But the flip side is that we'll have to invest in those properties as well. So it's a bit of a double edge there. And obviously inflation is fairly stable at the moment, and we think that will continue to be stable over the next 2 or 3 years. But sometimes it's a bit of a crystal ball gazing, I think. So there's some of the issues that we face. So really this is a bit of a holding plan, if you like, for 25-26 until we get that improved data. There's issues around organisational capacity. So, you know, if you look back in terms of our investment, we perhaps haven't been able to, you know, spend all the money that's been allocated. So making sure that we've got sufficient capacity in the team to be able to do that, making sure that we've got our procurement as smart as it can be to be able to deliver. So that's why I've kind of balanced the amount that we need to spend next year in terms of what we think is realistically deliverable. So we need to make some priorities. We need to make some choices going forward. Similar pressures on the growth programme as well, but we are working with taking a slightly different approach rather than trying to do everything ourselves. We're working with partners, you know, bringing the registered providers in to be able to look at some of that growth in the city, and there's a lot of interest for that as well. So making sure that where things aren't perhaps as viable for us or cost a bit too much, can somebody else do it, or can we share some of that work? And a good example is the work that we're doing perhaps on Gleaders Valley in terms of the approach that we're taking there. There are some opportunities, of course. You know, the right to buy discount is reduced, so we will be able to keep more of that income in the council, 100% retention for investment, and that stabilisation of the rent policy will help as well going forward. And we think there may well be some more grant available in due course as part of the work that we're doing with, you know, councils like Southwark and others, is that we are making a case to government to be able to look at, you know, putting an initial cash injection in, because we're not alone in this. There's lots of other councils with HRAs where there's a real issue. So will the government put a cash injection in to be able to deal with some of this, you know, challenge that we've got, but also is there some potential to be able to look at actually revisiting the original debt settlement and looking at reallocating of that. So in summary, Chair, members, business plans being fully updated to draw on a refreshed asset management strategy. We've got that huge data exercise that's taking place. We've taken a more proportionate approach to capital planning for the next year. This is a holding plan, and we will be bringing back a more detailed business plan for 26-27, and I'd like to make sure that members are more actively involved in that process over the next year. So I'll leave it there, Chair, if that's okay.
Right, thank you very much. So it's quite a long report there, but it's a pretty important. I guess it's kind of interesting as a committee that we're looking at sort of forecasting over what's actually going to happen over 30 years. We don't always get a chance to do that when we're looking at annual budgets. But I just, quick observation, and I know I've said that, you know, we often say that council housing is a really important public service, but as Ajman said, it's also big business. And I've noticed that for the first time, our 5-year plan takes us over £1 billion budget. So over the next 5 years, that's what's actually projected there. And yeah, that is you know, some scale, isn't it, of what we do. So, right, so we've got questions from Councillor Chaplin, first of all.
Well, thank you, Chair. I didn't realise I managed to get my 2 penneth in early. Thank you, Ajman, for this report, for all the detail that's in there. It does reflect some significant ambition that we will have a budget that's going over £1 billion there. My attention was drawn to pages 116, 117 on the commercial resilience of this of our ambitions, really, and just noticed that I understand the reasoning now for the total borrowing and why we'd be pushing the borrowing up in order to build more homes that are so much needed in this city. But we've been sitting on assets of over £150 million, but we're prepared to drop that reserve down to 50 million. And so I'm concerned that we've been sitting on what must therefore be relatively high reserves when we could have been building homes in the last few years.
Do should we address that point? I mean,
Yes,
if they-
yes, I'd like that point addressed. That's,
Ashman, can you talk us through that? So, the graph on page 117 in particular.
Yeah.
Tell us what the thinking is there.
Okay, I'm just looking to see if my finance colleague disappeared.
It's done a runner now, yeah.
I think this is the reserve that we have for the maintenance as opposed to the new build. So what that graph is showing is that that's what we've got, which we're spending at the moment. But as we've started to spend that, and then that number goes down, then we will need to increase the borrowing to be able to deal with that gap. So as with any reserve, once you've spent it, unless you can replenish it. So obviously we've got to keep a minimum level of reserves, and that's sort of set at just under 12 million to try and deal with eventualities. But this is more about the major repairs reserve money that we have available to us. And as that investment takes place, that will reduce. And that's what that graph is showing.
Right, thanks. Councillor Chaplin, yes, do you want to come back in on that?
a further bite at the cherry. On page 120, you seem to be setting a voids level at 2%, which would work out at about, on current numbers of homes that we have, would work out at about 760 homes, which is better than where we are at the moment. But I just wonder whether it ought to be possible to bring that down further to nearer the 400 mark, just to pull a figure out which is lower than the 760. But because obviously the more homes that we have with people in them paying rent, the less of a cost it is to us in terms of the council tax that's paid on void properties, and in terms of income coming into the HRA, so that we can better maintain the housing stock and build more homes.
I find you able to...
Yeah, I think the void rates, sometimes it depends on the turnover. People moving from one property to another. So sometimes the housing allocation policy can help in that process. And I know the committee will have another report a bit later on the agenda in terms of reviewing the housing policy committee. So I think it's really important once we do we can't necessarily stop people wanting to, move from their property, etc. But once we do get it, it's really important to be able to deal with it as quickly as we possibly can. That's the important thing. But I think some of the policy, ideas that we might have will help to make sure that we reduce the turnover of properties on an annual basis. But we'd have to, based around 1 to 2% per year, because that's the accepted norm, I think, in terms of the turnover.
When you say the accepted norm, do you mean with similar housing providers, or is it generally accepted across the industry?
It can be between 2 and 5%, depending on where you are, really, I think, in terms of the turnover. So I think 2%, I think, we've got 38,000 stock. My maths isn't really all that good. 700 odd. But if we can turn those around as quickly as we possibly can, and that's the important thing, really. And as I say, if we can make some policy changes, that means that people don't have to move as often, then that will also have an impact as well, I think.
Thanks very much. That's really helpful. Should we go to Councillor Baker for this all? If you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at the stock increase plan and the prediction that we'd like to have an extra 887 homes by 2930. I know we've purchased some recently, or in the process of purchasing some off plan and things like that. Can we have the figures about how many new properties we've acquired, new council houses we've acquired in the last 12 months? Because there's no figures that say that here.
Yes, I can get you those figures.
Thank you very much.
Broken down probably by what we're acquiring from, that's on the market at the moment, what we're buying new build from developers and what we're developing now, so I can get that figure for you.
Because it shows us the work that the allocation section has done, because I know we have increased it by some. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. That would be a helpful thing. Again, if you could circulate those figures to the whole committee, I think we should all have a look at them. That's a good question. All right, I'll go to Councillor Turpin next.
Thanks. It might be a short answer to this because you kind of spoke about the things that I'm largely. I wanted to ask you about the right to buy, and you've discussed a lot of what you know and what you don't know yet, I guess. So I was thinking, would we get some grants from government, particularly with the new housing targets, and what the impact of this massive, massive uplift in applications that we just had, like 3-4 times the normal amount for a year, isn't it? It's a lot. So the impact on that, which you've already said, and also then I'm making a guess that it's not going to affect things like empty homes and homelessness so much, because I would assume that people who are buying their council homes are stable tenants. So I guess the short answer that I expect you to give me is yes. If I can just ask that we have some briefings on this when you know more, and that we're kind of kept up to date. I know there's a lot in the air, and discussions from governments have been in very vague terms so far.
Yeah, I can get you the figures. I think our figures might be well over 1,000 in terms of applications, and other authorities have had, large authorities have had similar numbers. Not all of them will necessarily, end up being sold. There might be issues along the way. But I can get you certainly the detail in terms of how many applications we've had and how many have come to conclusion going forward.
I mean, also just the impact of the new government's new policy as well, in general, so we know what we're dealing with. I would like that. I'd like to be briefed on that when you know yourself. The other point that I was going to ask, and I feel like I've probably said this 100 times, is that regarding the stock increase, will we consider having an in-house stock, like a builders department, builders works department, whatever, because it seems to be like the cost of building has gone up, no denying that, but the cost of anything to the council always seems to be more than the cost to anyone else. And when you bring in a developer's viability problem, I'm going to call it a problem because it's a problem for us, is that's a hell of a lot of money that's being spent that's going out of the council, and it kind of feels that we could be less efficient than a developer and still save money. And so are we able to consider running that service in-house, and will that decision be made on, well, we haven't got sorry, I shouldn't say it like that. Will the decision be made on what capacity the council currently has, or can we take into account the economic impact of doing it?
There's not many places, in fact I don't know of any council that's got their own house building team. So I think we've got to, our repair service has to focus on what we need to do, and that's repairing council properties. And it's really important that there's a stable workflow for that team. Where there's fluctuations in work, then it's probably better to make sure that we give that to contractors. I can't see a business case sitting here now stacking up where I would want to recommend that we have our own house building team to be able to build houses in the city. There are people and organisations, better equipped to be able to do that, I think. And the approach that we've been taking in terms of our housing growth plan is to make sure that we work more in partnership with our partners, with Homes England, with registered providers, to make sure that they can bring some resources in, they can bring some specialism in to be able to build in the city. And where we can build, we will do, but we'll use the appropriate mechanisms. That just adds another element of complexity, given what we've got to do. That at the moment's not the right time to thinking about that.
Okay, thanks very much. Right, okay, that. go to Councillor Williams then.
Thank you, Chair. And once again, Councillor Turpin, I'm getting very suspicious. You keep asking the questions that I would like to answer. But no, as it's my first meeting, I guess I have a degree of licence to ask some stupid questions. So, yeah, I mean, if you said there's possibly 1,000 homes or applications, or you actually said over 1,000 applications, I mean, SNR last year, or 18 months ago, we talked about replacing one house would cost about 300,000. So you're talking about, as a result of these increased applications, just to keep still, we've got to find £300 million, which is a staggering amount of money. So here's the first of the stupid questions. I assume that when we sell a council property, we get all the money. Is that correct?
No.
Not until now, it wasn't.
So we don't. We do now.
Could we?
Yeah.
I mean, actually, have you got a snappy explanation of what the position was and how it's changed?
Yeah, so previously, before the autumn statement, an element of the money that we got from sales of council properties went back to the Treasury. But now we can keep 100% of it for the house right to buy going forward. But there's still a consultation that's out by government in terms of right to buy, and which I've earlier mentioned, and so we'll see what comes out of that. But as things stand at the moment, we're allowed to keep 100% of sales going through.
And will that affect these properties in this tranche up to the 21st of November?
No, so the reason I think we've had a spike is because the discount level that somebody would have got has reduced. So that's why we've had the peak. So it won't make a difference to the individuals that have made the application because they'll get the discount rate before that. Anything that comes now from here on in will get the reduced discount. It makes a difference to us in the sense that we will be able to keep all of those receipts, whereas before we wouldn't have been able to. We'd have had to give some of it back to central government. In terms of money or... So I think...
Let's just be clear about what the question is. We're talking about the number of applications, number of discounts. Yep, no, it's fine. That's okay. It's just so that the webcast picks it up. So yeah, just want to make sure the question is about the numbers involved, really. Yeah. Ashman, are you able to address that?
The reductions in the discount, is that the question that you're asking? Yeah, so I think it's going down to below £24,000, which is to the 2012 levels, and previously it was around 104. Maximum that people could get is 104,000 or thereabouts. I guess not a lot of people in Sheffield would have got that because a lot of properties that we sell are well below that mark. But places like London and the South East, where you might be selling a council flat for £400,000 or £500,000, that that's a sizable discount that they would get the maximum of. So it will affect everybody in terms of level that they get because it's significantly going to be reduced to that 2012 level, which was around the 24,000 mark as the top level. I'm talking from memory, but what I will do is I'll get you the discount rates so you've got that information to hand. Okay.
Is it fair to... I think the point is that, yeah, we've made some points about sort of general levels of discounts and the effect of it changing, and I think we're all going to want a briefing on what's happened with that sudden peak that came in between the autumn statement announcement of the government's change in direction and the deadline for that effect, because there's quite a lot that the service has to deal with now, isn't there? But I think it is fair to say, I mean, just in terms of those, I just want to point out that up till now, people get £100,000 effectively given to them as a subsidy to buy the house and take it out of our council stock, and of course that money doesn't come back to the council, and even now we're talking about 100% receipts, that's after the discount. So it's fair to say that right to buy is still not a particularly good thing for councils. Should we just wrap up those questions? So I suppose without going into all the right to buy stuff, but yeah, let's just wrap up any pressing questions. So, Councillor Williams.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just does it, within those calculations, if the council has just spent an enormous amount of money bringing a house up to spec and then it's sold, do we miss out again? Well, if we've just spent a lot of money, say putting a new roof on a house, new windows, etc., and then somebody comes in and writes to buy it, do we lose out on that money spent on maintenance?
Yeah, there are some rules in terms of if you've made some investment and there's a criteria that sometimes you can recoup that. I'm not sure all the precise details of it, but equally also if you've built a new property, then there's a time frame in terms of when you won't be eligible for that on that discount level.
But is this a quick one? I'm keen to move on a little bit because of the time, but yeah, go on. Yeah,
Sorry, Chair, I know that we're taking our time, haven't we? I just wanted to tie what Richard was asking you there to together in that when we're selling a house, I mean, I don't know what every other ward is like, but you know, if there's a council house goes in Gleedless, I don't think there's going to be more than 120 grand. It might even be half that. But so how are we? Why is it costing us £300,000 to build a new house when the houses we're selling are nowhere near that?
Well, we carry out a procurement exercise. You know, we have tenders that go out, and the figures that we get back, you know, reflect the latest position, latest prices. Sometimes sites might be difficult, you know, topography and all those things are factored in before a tender is received. So, you know, these are the prices that we're not creating. These are what the contractors who are submitting the tenders. That's what's coming through.
It just doesn't feel like good value for money. You know, I am a proud northerner. I like to be frugal, you know, and I have some idea of how the housing market works regarding the cost of buying homes, nearly new homes. You know, 300 grand in Sheffield buys you a lot of house.
It does, but we go through a process, Councillor Turpin, and the properties, you know, that's quite high standard in terms of, you know, what we ask for, the specifications, the carbon footprint. We're not always necessarily comparing like with like. The whole point of having a procurement exercise is to ensure that we get appropriate value for money, and you know, that's open to competition. When that comes back, and we might like it, we might not like it, but that's how the process works. That's why we've got a procurement process and rules around that, I'm afraid.
Right. So there's a lot of stuff to pick up in a briefing, and so right to buy I think can be dealt with there. Should we park the right to buy questions? So just seeing who else have we got anything else on this one? So Councillor Baker, yes, on the business plan.
We're trying to improve our number of homes we have. And we state in figures here that we're planning to increase our stock by 887 homes between now and 29-30. But because the changes of the law, it looks as if we're going to lose more of those to right to buy in that period. So consequently, we're not going forward, we're going backward. And I think it's a major thing for us to record and say, and I do think we should do some more substantial work with partners to increase our number of homes. And I personally don't think getting a builder to build them specifically for us is the cheapest way of doing it. If we can buy them off plan, if we can work possibly with the Sheffield Housing Company, which I know we have to a certain extent, but there's all ins and outs of that. So what we need to do, quite simply, Chair, is request officers go away and look at options we have in increasing our stock programme. And I'm sure they're already doing it, so we're really only enforcing what they're doing, but I think it matters that we state that because this committee wants it, not just officers. Thank you, Chair.
I'm sure they'll all agree with that. Just in view of the time, I'll not ask anyone to come back on that point, but I'm sure it's one that we'd all agree with. But Councillor Jones did want to come in.
Just briefly on that point, my good friend Mike has found the figures on page 96 of the report, which shows the unintended consequences of previous governments in terms of raising that amount of discount, and obviously now the predatory purchasing, as people are seeing that window being shut. It's appropriate that that window is shut, but unfortunately we are dealing with the ramifications of that, which is awkward. And I know that in terms of what Paul's saying, and Mike again raised this, Direct Works Department in the 1920s and 30s. We've done it in the past, we can do it in the future. But one thing I would pick up on, Paul, on the right to buy bit, and the other element that we always forget, you were suggesting, Paul, that if you can afford to buy your council house and everything else, you then become a secure tenant. I think history has suggested otherwise, because a lot of those council houses wound up becoming privately rented because people could no longer keep them up, which then becomes an additional burden on us. So I think as part of those reports going forward, there is a lot of stuff that we need to look at in terms of unintended consequences, both by central government policy and also people's desire to become a household owner, to become more secure in the land in which they live. Certainly for areas like Burngreave, there are a large number of people who buy houses because they want to feel they belong here in this country, and we've never really squared those bits off and explained to people that artefacts of buying your house, sometimes it is just better to be a tenant. And as someone who grew up as a council house tenant and securing my tenancy, I don't think it's anything we should have been ashamed of. I know previous governments have sort of poo-pooed that idea, but yeah, I think that's something to look at. Just wanted to make those comments there, Chair.
Yeah, I think they're all valid comments. It's right to draw attention to the number of private tenants renting from private landlords in ex-council houses. Councillor Norris.
Just very quickly, what you were describing with right to buy, that's been going on for a long time, and we've been reducing our stock, as has every other social landlord, and it has been, the analogy I've heard used is it's like trying to fill the bath with the plug out. And what I feel now with these changes from the autumn budget is we've got a bit of plug in the plug hole now. So it's still reducing, but it's reducing potentially much more slowly once this spike is gone. And the other thing about what Mark was saying, across the country, it's about 40% of the homes that have been bought have then ended up back in private rented. So it is a considerable drain. And we have that growth plan that Anna was talking about, that's where we're really trying to plug the gap. Yeah. Right, so this is something we should come back to in briefings. Councillor Jones, did you want to come out with something very quick before we move on?
I'll try, Chair, as best as I can. So two very brief observations. The 15 goals and everything else, and our aspirations for net zero and stuff, when we did this in a transitional committee many years ago now. Are we convinced that our aspirations here as a committee and as a council and as an authority going forward truly match up with those of our tenants? Have we done an assessment of what we want to go our work programme and what tenants want us to deliver? And then finally, in terms of the stock improvement and everything else, I guess as a £1 billion business, if we increase the amount of stock we've got, we can then potentially borrow more because we've got a bigger pot to borrow against. How do we balance off that virtual cycle becoming overheating the engine and blowing up? Because we could wind up inadvertently over-borrowing to increase our stock and it coming back and bite us. What checks and balances we got in there and risk for that bit? I hope that's easy enough. Sorry, Chair.
I don't know if we can just address that very shortly, if at all, or if it's just appropriate to bring it back in the context of briefings. Shall we do that? I mean, I think it's time to move on. I'm just conscious, I know 2 members have to leave for 4 o'clock, and just like to start on the next
So
slide.
it's okay, Chair. I think Alan and I best leave before you take the next report. Yeah.
Very well, yeah, thanks for bearing with us on that. Can we just take the vote on this one formally? So this is where we have the recommendation. So formally we're noting the business plan today as it goes forward until it will be brought to the full council in February in probably a similar form, but not necessarily exactly the same. So recommendation actually on page 81 to effectively note this report, note that after it is adopted by full council, it's this committee that monitors it, and note the recommendation for increasing council rents as the Executive Director has outlined, in line with the regulator's rent standard. So set of recommendations there. Everyone happy with that broadly? Right, getting nods before folks go. Thank you very much for that. Yep, good luck with the two of you have to go for that. Thank you very much, Ajman, for presenting that. And we can hopefully move on to the next next item here. So, Matt, thank you for your patience in seeing through that. And we've got really important policy coming forward for approval here. So, would you like to introduce yourself for the record and then give us an outline of this? And obviously, we've got the report, it's got it in writing, so, you know, some of the main points. Thanks.
Yep, thank you, Chair. My name's Matt Sutton. I'm the Service Manager for our Tenancy Enforcement and Sustainment team, and I'm also Housing Safeguarding Lead. So I'm here to present the domestic abuse policy for the Housing Service. So we know that domestic abuse is both the leading cause of homelessness in Sheffield and a significant issue for our current tenants. So a policy will enable us to detail our commitment to supporting victims and tackling domestic abuse. The policy outlines, amongst other things, our definition of domestic abuse, recognising that this is much wider than partner abuse, our partnership working arrangements, what victims can expect from us, what perpetrators can expect from us, our approach to rehousing and how that might support and protect victims, how we support victims who are from minoritised communities, and how we respond to cases involving staff. So we already have a domestic abuse procedure, and if approved, the policy would provide the framework for the procedure to be located. This procedure would then be subject to regular reviews to ensure our approach is both evidence-based and in accordance with most current best practice. So we know that the Regulator of Social Housing requires us to have a domestic abuse policy, specifically the standard 2.3.1, and it's also important to note that the Housing Service are currently working with what's called the Domestic Abuse Housing Alliance, known as DAHA. They are a national partnership to improve the sector's response to domestic abuse. We aim for accreditation with DAHA by September 2025, and an important part of the accreditation process is the presence of a domestic abuse policy. Regarding consultation, we've consulted widely with both partner agencies and tenants. This consultation process recognised that the partner agencies in the city that often lead on domestic abuse have considerable knowledge, experience and expertise, including working with minoritised groups. We've used and lent on this expertise to develop the policy. Through our DAHA accreditation process, we've met regularly with the key stakeholders and had specific sessions on the policy. It's included, amongst others, the Domestic Abuse Coordination Team, IDAS, Shelter, Ashiana, DWP, Citizens Advice, Sheffield's Women Aid, Framework, SWAP and Cranston. These agencies and organisations work tirelessly to protect people, help survivors to move on from their experiences and to prevent future harm occurring. This policy will support and augment the excellent work that already is in place across the city with these agencies. We also held an in-person consultation session with Tenants and Ashiana, and crucially, DAHA have provided us with specific consultation sessions on the development of the policy. As mentioned previously, the policy reflects the fact that we may have tenants who are victims and who are also staff, so the policy is cognizant of the employment issues and domestic abuse policy, which covers staff who are victims and perpetrators. So happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, and for also taking a lot of people through the process of drawing this policy together. So drawing on a lot of expertise we've got both within and outside the council, and I think members here have been through quite a bit of the briefings and discussion on that too. So yeah, questions. Councillor Turpin. Good point. I should probably bring Richard in first, but as it's you, go ahead. Yeah, and then Richard can say that he was going to ask your question.
Really? Do you want to ask my questions, or shall I ask yours?
Down, boys, down.
Thanks. So this is really welcome, and it shows a great deep level of understanding, I think, of the issues. Something that it feels like there's a lot of signposting. The council's response is signposting rather than doing, or that is the doing of the council. So while there's a lot of detail and understanding, I would have liked a bit more of what the council can actually do, if that makes sense. And I'm just wondering whether or not to reference personal experience, but I think I might not. It feels like a lot of so we accept that the majority of victims of domestic abuse are women, and it seems like the victim, in most cases, women, are the ones who leave, and they continue to be victims as they enter homelessness, shelters, temporary accommodation, and so on. And also, if there's children involved, they often do the same thing. And so I just wondered what can be done about why should the victim be the one who continues to pay the price of their experience, while their abuser gets to remain in the family home. If that's a little awkward way to describe what I'm saying, I'm sorry about that. But I wonder what can be done about that a little bit more.
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. Matt, can you give that sense, if you can, say how we've addressed it in the policy?
Yeah. What's probably important to note, Councillor, is that as part of the embedding of the policy, there's 3 tiers of training that have been rolled out. So while I do accept the point that we would signpost people on for that specialist support, the training will enable officers, including managers who are making decisions, to work in what we would call a trauma-informed manner. So our interactions with victims should be better for those victims. So while we may still ask specialist agencies to do that specialist work, we should do no harm, and we should be supporting them and communicating with them in a way that doesn't re-traumatise them. An obvious example is if you turn up at Howden House, you need to have staff who've gone through that training, so understand what your experience and journey may be like. And it's a really good question about perpetrators as well. So if you are a tenant of Sheffield City Council and behave in an abusive manner towards your partner in that tenancy or that locality, you're breaching your tenancy conditions. So we are able to take action against you. Obviously, that's very, very complicated if both parties remain in the household. If one party does flee, we're then able to take action. And we would always work very closely with the police, who have access to different orders, civil orders. And as you'll have seen in the news recently, it's a constantly evolving picture of the court action that the police can rely on as well. So I hope that addresses briefly both your questions.
So thank you. Yeah, and I mean, I guess it's complicated, isn't it? But you wouldn't be able to just say, well, actually, they're not moving. You're moving. That's sort of something that would be easy to do, I guess, is it? And I think this would roll over to the next items, the allocation items as well, where that's going to be a really important part of this policy, isn't it? I think that maybe we just deal with that on the next item.
Thanks. Yeah, I think someone should look at the next item. Should I go to Councillor Williams and see if you're going to ask exactly the same thing?
You ran out. No, I've got a separate question, and I apologise if it's in the report and I've missed it, but does this cover the residents in private rented accommodation as well, or is it purely for council tenants?
So the policy is written to cover both those tenants that we already have. It's also written in a manner that, the example I used, if you are not currently a tenant but you come to Howden House, or you come to our attention, or you become a tenant. So that's why we've phrased it around tenants and residents of the city. And obviously, let's not forget as well that you could end up in Sheffield tonight, and last week you were not in Sheffield. You might have ended up here as a consequence of abuse or abusive behaviour. So I hope that answers your question. It's written to cover the people that we serve currently and those that may come through places such as Howden House.
I'm not quite clear, to be honest. So do people who rent properties privately, are they covered by this, or is there a separate policy somewhere?
Sorry, no, it doesn't cover people who've got tenancy agreements with, it doesn't interfere in the tenancy agreements that people have got with other landlords. So, yeah.
Thank you, that's clear now.
I mean, it's important thing. I think the phrase that's used is, it applies to city council tenants and other residents. And of course, it's kind of the nature of people who find themselves indoor coming out of domestic abuse situations, certainly with the overlap of homelessness. But it was also primarily with our landlord hat on, and to sort of meet the requirements of the regulator. It's about one of the requirements is to make sure we got a policy that addresses the needs of our tenants, I think. So I think, yeah, there is some degree of overlap, but it is very much focused on, it's about protecting our tenants in our role as landlord, in addition to how we work as a council. Sorry, I don't want to limit that point. Can I take Councillor Norris first, and then go further after that?
This is a question on behalf of Councillor Chaplin, who's had to leave for another meeting. But he was just in the abusive behaviour includes, in the psychological and emotional abuse, I think it's on page 149, one of the things he was concerned about is, does it cover what is in effect gaslighting? The experience he used was one of his residents where her partner would continually move things around the house and say that he hadn't. He was just concerned that level of kind of, we couldn't think of a better word to describe it than gaslighting, is included in the psychological abuse.
Yeah, I would consider that to be a form of psychological, emotional abuse, and we would cover that. What we would tend to do as well is, with the procedure that sits under this, I think it's a really good point that there's new terminology or recognition of typology of abuse. So as we're updating the procedure, and obviously we do operate not in a vacuum, but as part of MARAC and those other multi-agency meetings, we'd absolutely move with the times and recognise that form of abuse. And as new typologies came up, we would as well. So, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor, it's happy with that. If we go to Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. My question is about, you already mentioned about us not doing any more harm, so that when people are presenting, we don't put things in the way. I noticed that Paul mentioned about us working with lots of partners and such like, so it's more about, are we addressing, do you think that we've addressed sufficiently the barriers to people seeking our assistance and our help? Is there anything more we can do to make sure that people feel that they know where to go, that the support is really out there? Is that covered sufficiently in here? I'm just seeking your input on this.
So I think an element of that, it'll be how we publicise this with partner agencies, so that, because a lot of the people that are victims of domestic abuse will present to those partner agencies first. And if those partner agencies have confidence that Sheffield City Council's housing service are able to deal sensitively in a trauma-informed manner. So as safeguarding lead for the housing service, part of what I do will be to promote it to those agencies who've been involved as we've worked through this.
May I?
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah, thank you.
So I might be able to add a little bit as well, because I think it's really well articulated, that concern. We're part of a broader partnership, strategic partnership, and I sit on the board that deals with domestic abuse and violence against women and girls and so forth. Obviously, it can happen to anybody, but it's more predominantly reported against women. And this is very much about collaboration. So this policy for for the council is just part of that whole jigsaw of a response that we have to make sure that that wraparound is there. So it's our tool, if you like, to make sure we're clear about what we are doing, but we're signed up to that broader strategy across the partnership, which involves police, health services, social care, safeguarding, voluntary services, etc. And you talked about those that have got another landlord, and clearly their landlords will have their own policies and approaches to dealing with domestic abuse, but we will work with them as well. So registered providers will have similar policies in place to the ones that we do. Many socially responsible landlords will also, who are in the private sector, will also be alert and aware. But part of it is about, as you've said, education, information, making sure people have got the right information, and our overall strategy does deal with working with perpetrators as well as victims, because you absolutely need to tackle what is at the root cause of this. And when we talked about, Paul very eloquently talked about the emphasis on the victim potentially needing to move, our whole raft of policies and strategies, it's about choice. It's about how do you enable someone. They might take a short-term choice that I need to get out of the situation, but they might then decide, actually, I do want to remain in the family home, and we will support them around accessing those remedies. One of the things that we have is a sanctuary scheme in Sheffield, where if someone wants to stay in their home, we will make sure that home is a safer place as it can be for them. We also will award a priority to move if people would like to do so, if that's their aim. So I would see this policy as a really important step forward to us formalising our own policies, but it is in that broader set of working across our partnerships.
Good, thanks. That's really thoughtful words there. So okay with that. So I don't see any more questions on that, so I'm just going to say thanks to you again. Is everyone now happy to turn to the recommendations? So the recommendation here is specifically to approve the policy that we've heard about in the form attached in the reports there. And also to note that approval of this policy is essential to our continuing work as a council with the Domestic Abuse Housing Alliance, which is an important point. So I think getting nods all round, happy to approve that. So thank you very much. And I guess that will move us neatly on to the final item, which is about housing allocations, as has just been mentioned. So, yes, if we just have a quick change of seats, and do you want to, yeah, come to the seat and introduce yourself if you're presenting this report, and we'll go from there. So we're just on to page 159, I think, of the agenda pack. Okay, so, of course, Suzanne, you have introduced yourself already, but yeah, should we complete the introductions?
Hi there, yeah, I'm David Wilkinson, Service Manager of Free Housing Services.
Nice to see you here at this committee. Thanks for being very patient and sitting through the last 2 hours of stuff. Over to one of you to introduce the report, really, which we've got here.
Okay, thank you very much. As you know, I'm Suzanne Allen, Head of Citywide Housing Services, and it was really helpful to have been here for the earlier discussions as well. And I think you're quite right that there are a number of items that link together, and this is one of them, the allocations policy review that we're asking today for members to consider if we should go ahead with a full review of the allocations policy, and also to agree the approach that we take to developing a new policy, particularly around consultation. So essentially, and I know you've all had the paper beforehand, so I won't go through it in great detail, but I will summarise what I believe are the main points, and clearly will take any questions. So essentially, we are looking for that approval for a full review. The policy hasn't been reviewed for a number of years, both the context has changed, the availability of our own properties and other social housing, and the needs and requirements and demands of residents of Sheffield who are considering social housing as one of their options. So essentially, and we have put quite a lot of information in the report for you about the legal context, which I won't go through in great detail now, but it was a specific point that we talked about at knowledge briefing to make sure all members are aware of the place of social housing, council housing, and the requirement to have an allocations policy, both in terms of how we allocate our own stock, but also managing the nominations that we have in place, the agreements with other registered providers. I don't need to tell you, but social housing, council housing is absolutely critical, and it's got such an important place and a positive role in providing homes to people in Sheffield, and it's a very positive thing to have. So really interested in the points about right to buy and what the possible implications may be there. As you all know, we've recently agreed the new housing strategy as well. So the allocations policy is a key enabler of that, to say, is it fit to get us to where we want to be across those 5 ambitions? So the implications are that we have to have a policy that is fit for purpose, and a review of a policy is a good thing, but we haven't undertaken one for a number of years, so it is the right opportunity. There's been some amendments made to reflect Homes Reduction Act, Domestic Abuse Act changes that have come in, but we haven't done a whole-scale review. So we have identified that there are a number of specific challenges that a review could help us to address or consider. Are there changes that would help us to do that? So there are a number of areas, for example, around which are contained in 1.2 of the report, or section 1, which talks about, we could look at the qualification criteria about who can be eligible to be on our register. We need to think about the size of our register and how that is influenced by the policy we have. It's currently 25,800 households, and that is growing, although we do undertake an annual review in asking people to update their details and re-register. We have fairly high administration costs. It costs about £200,000 a year to look after the register. At the moment, under our current scheme, 50% of those registered haven't bid for over a year. So we need to think about, is this the right way of capturing information about people who need housing, or need it in the quite foreseeable future, really, rather than at some point in the distant time. We don't at the moment, I'll just talk about priorities. The number of priority awards, and domestic abuse is one of those areas, so it links back to the previous discussion where people may need to move. The numbers of priorities awarded are growing, and the numbers of properties available to meet that requirement are reducing. So we have to actually look at, can we give reasonable preference to the people who we have to? So it's not what you could do, but you must do under legislation, or we must do. And there is a mismatch there. We have to think about, are we making the best use of our stock for example, adapted properties. We don't have an adapted properties register at the moment, which I think generally, and the feedback we've had so far, is that would be a good thing to look at, so that A, people get to the home they need quickly and efficiently, and they can move on with their lives, but we make sure we're not investing in adaptations that may not be required when we did have homes that could have been fit or tweaked, amended to meet that household's need. And we do also have to address the fact that at the moment our policy, which allows for people who, we call them waiting time, don't we, in Sheffield colloquially, but actually people who don't have an identified housing need under the provisions of the Housing Act are allowed to join the register, bid for properties, and a proportion of properties are allocated to them. Now, there's not a right or wrong on it, but we just need to face the fact and deal with the fact that at this point, is that the right way to go forward? And Sheffield is an outlier now in being one of the few authorities that retains the kind of balance or approach that we've currently got. So it is about going out there, given the demand that we've got, given the supply issues. And there is a lack of affordable housing. We've got ambitions with the new housing strategy to have 35,000 new homes in the city over the next 10 years. Some of those will be affordable housing, but we have to be realistic about our choices now. What we know is that amongst those people that we have to provide a home for, who should have reasonable preference, it includes our care leavers, it includes families who are homeless, it includes people who might be stuck in a hospital because they need a home that is fit for them. So it is thinking that through in terms of how you prioritise amongst all those different needs, but also think about the other options. Private sector is a really important part of the overall picture, so it isn't only about social housing, and that private rented properties need to be of a really high standard. We know that as well. We have checked before we've come to you to ask for you about, do you think it's the right time to have a review and going forward with that? What other local authorities are doing. We've got a lot of information about that, which we will consider as part of the review. And we also undertook an external piece of work with Housemark for them to have a look at our current policy and give us some pointers about areas which we could think about improving. And they were broadly in line with the issues or the areas that I've outlined today. So we all know that looking at the allocations policy will be an issue that is likely to get a lot of interest from both the residents of Sheffield but other organisations we work with. And therefore, we would propose that if you're in agreement to have a review, this is likely to take about a year. So it's really thorough. Everyone gets a really good chance to give us their views, and that you as a committee have two opportunities to consider that. So we have a 2-round consultation process, and we'd also work with you about how you as members want to be involved in the consultation and developing the new policy options that we would have. We do have to consult with registered housing providers, so that's outlined for us and that's included in the report. But essentially, I'm looking at 2 things for you today. Do you think it's the right time to have an allocations policy review, and can we go ahead with that? And are you in agreement with broadly the draft consultation plan about how we go about doing that, which is attached as well? Very conscious of time, so I won't say any more, but obviously happy to answer any questions.
Right, thanks very much for that. There's quite a few people want to ask questions, so I mean, just in view of the time and the fact that this is about launching a consultation, then we can maybe try and keep this fairly brief. But should we just go straight? I'll go to Councillor Baker first of all.
Thank you, Chair. Yes and yes, we need it. It has to come. Oops, sorry. Things have changed over time, and we need to change with them. So, thanks, Chair.
Thanks. And go to Councillor Norris next.
I'll say yes and yes as well. The bit I'm concerned about, particularly from Woodhouse Ward, my ward, it's been raised often and was raised again last night, and we have talked about it a bit before. I appreciate our statutory responsibilities, but how can we consult, or how can we give some assurance that we're thinking about the overall effect on a neighbourhood of our allocations? Because when you get a concentration of people who, for whatever reasons, the antisocial behaviour rises, you can absorb that to a certain extent, but it really does impact on other residents. And so just how are we managing that in our asking about that issue in our consultation, and how that might be built into the policy?
I wonder if we just park that, bring in Councillor Jones.
Yes, thank you. I understand this is very much needed. As a Burn Grief councillor, I'm kind of constantly contacted by residents who are struggling about making moves. Understanding the priorities is critical because I guess in our patch it's often said that everyone's got a priority, so no one's actually got a priority because it all levels out. Understanding the aspirations and needs of housing, it needs to be reflected within this, absolutely, in that respect. And also understanding why people aren't bidding. I think there's unintended consequences of our policies. If you bid on a house and you then turn it down, and you bid on a house, you turn it down, and you bid on a house, you're then off the list. So people are possibly cautious, so understanding and those consultations are going to be critical in understanding that. So yes, very much understanding that. I guess the main thing that I thought of when I was reading this element is, do our constituents then become fearful that this process will become a reset, so that those who have been trying to get moves for such a long time, will their requirements suddenly be forgotten, and their time of waiting and everything else be forgotten. So there will be that element about protecting people going forward who've got long-standing desires to move on to different housing for whatever reason. So all those elements, but yes, absolutely, this is needed.
Okay, so again, maybe come back to that, the point about the expectation people are built up. Can I just check, Councillor Williams, did you have a question? Yeah, all right, okay, yeah. All right, let's go to Councillor Turpin. What is a question on behalf of either of you?
You can go first this time.
Go, no, go ahead. One of you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Turpin. Yeah, I know from a Stannington perspective, tenants have often said to me in discussions, it was better when we had people of similar ages in the right things. Is that something we can look at again within this consultation paper?
Yes, the issue of age banding, yeah, okay. Councillor Turpin?
Thanks. So I grew up in a council house, and my uncle lived in a council house, and my grandparents lived in a council house. And back then, council housing was for anyone and everyone. And so it makes me sad that we will be reducing the general allocation. It makes me sad in those terms, and it also worries me that it would more likely to kind of, for want of a better word, be creating ghettos, where, you know, when working on the regeneration of Gleadless Valley in my ward, it's a lot of talk about mixed tenures and not having, you know, people of the same demographic in order to help the area improve and build communities. And it feels that reducing the general allocation will go against that kind of thing. So it is. I'm just mostly sad about it, but it is different now, isn't it? It's totally different now to how it was in the 70s or whenever, how far back you want to go. So I do support the review of the allocation policy. I wonder if, well, I wonder how the hierarchy of priority vulnerabilities, however you want to term it, how that would work, you know. And I also wonder, in terms of process, if this would be something that we as a committee would be able to steer as we go, or whether that would be something like options papers, something like that. I mean, maybe I'll just have to wait and see how that develops. But.
Thanks. Yeah, I think we've collectively listed all the really tricky, thorny issues in allocations. So yeah, actually, very good, everyone. Probably the answer is what Councillor Evans just said, that it'll depend on. We'll wait to see what comes forward in the consultation. But do you want to respond to any of those points that you can do?
I'm really conscious of time, but it's such an important thing, and it's really, really significant for the city. So I think we need a big discussion, and we will have that as part of the consultation, including how you want to be involved, whether it's through knowledge briefings, special meetings, whether you want to be part of the consultation discussions we have, how we work with the local area committees as well about specific views and concerns. We have a lot of contact with other authorities who have changed their allocations policies and about how they've done that, who've moved from a similar position to Sheffield. Now, nothing's foregone. This is about saying, what are the right things to do? What are the options? And you saying, let's have a look at it. I absolutely think one of the key things about the impacts is for us to get better on prevention, so fewer people are moving, because you have more stable communities if fewer people are moving out of them. So we have to address transfer of tenants, reasons why people don't feel able to stay in that home. I mean, often it's very legitimate, isn't it? Your family size has increased, or you now need a smaller home. But if there are avoidable reasons as to why people would move, that would help. Absolutely agree about regeneration and communities that are resilient. So I think there is a lot that we do alongside an allocations policy review. So I think that's absolutely critical. I also think it's critical to recognise that the needs and requirements of people have changed, and that there is more need, there are more complex circumstances that people are facing. If we move to give more of our stock or first call, if you like, on people awarded a priority, currently about half of the awards for priorities are for people who've become homeless for whatever reason, including domestic abuse and other issues that face them. About the second largest priority group are people who have to move on grounds of health. So they absolutely need the right home to meet their health requirements. So there's a really big mixed group there. But regardless of the reason, if you've got lots of people coming in and out of an area, it's more difficult to have stability. So I think that sits within the wider housing strategy about great neighbourhoods where people are happy to call it their home. But they're all legitimate issues. So I think it is about going to the residents of Sheffield and saying, these are the options, what do you think? David, do you want to add anything? Because David knows so much about allocations policies from elsewhere.
Thank you, that was very kind. But no, I would really agree. I think it is about saying to the residents of Sheffield, what do you think? And I think the points that people have made are really valid. I think the points about neighbourhoods and people wanting to live there are really valid. But we need to listen to the residents of Sheffield now and listen to what they've got to say, and then bring that back and get a policy that works for Sheffield.
Right. Well, thanks very much. I mean, we're certainly going to hear a lot more about this over the course of the next year, aren't we? So can I suggest we just look at the recommendations, which is essentially to approve this piece of work. It's on page 161 too. So to approve the proposal to commence a review of the allocations policy and approve the approach to consultation as set out in section 2.3 of the report and as discussed, really. So, I mean, are people happy to agree to that, launch the process? Good. All right. Well, thanks very much, and good luck with it, because it's obviously not going to be an easy task, but it is time to do it, isn't it? Okay. Right. So, if everyone's happy, thanks for your work on that. And yes. So yeah, just before we finish with that was the last item there, and then we just said, going back to what we said before about recognising the amount of work that staff right across the council and housing service have put in, but coming to Christmas. So I was thinking, we haven't got the mince pies out this meeting, have we? But Christmas is coming, whether you like it or not.
I'm not singing a carol.
No, indeed, no. But but also just in view of everything we talked about the huge amount of work that's going on there, people dealing with budgets, but in particular people dealing with domestic abuse, and the numbers of people in temporary accommodation. You've got to recognise that within the field of housing, Christmas is not always a fun time for everyone, including our staff who have to be in here working on Christmas Day, dealing with those issues, and we do have staff on call all the time. Someone has to cover Christmas, someone has to cover Boxing Day, New Year's Eve, etc. So I just think it's worth putting a sort of note of appreciation to that. Penny helped with a form of words, so what's going to do this is suggest we say something more or less like, so we can possibly resolve it as a committee if everyone's able to do that, to thank the staff in the housing service working with individuals in the home is not always easy. They've worked very hard over this year, referred to the improvements in tenant satisfaction, and particular thanks to those working over Christmas to help some of the most vulnerable in the city. So some words to that effect. people are nodding. I think it would just be nice to actually recognise that as this is our December meeting, and I can give the slip of paper to Amanda to copy. Everyone happy with that? I mean, I think it's just a token of appreciation, recognising that we do that.
Do something a bit unusual. Shall we give them all a round of applause?
Oh. Go on then.
Go on, it's
yes,
Christmas.
Please. Thank you. If so,
Thanks, Chair. You do put up with a lot, don't you?
Yes, yeah, indeed, yeah.
May I say, Chair?
Yes.
So it's me. So thank you so much. And I would say, as one of the members of staff here today, we really appreciate the support of the committee, which is always so valued. You do ask the hard questions. You're here to do that. But we really, really value your support as well, and particularly appreciate Mark not giving us a carol.
Yeah, that is one good thing. So just say thanks very much for coming, and yeah, I mean, Suzanne, do pass on the our thanks of the committee to your team, but we'll put that in the minutes formally and maybe ask to disseminate it. But yeah, thanks everyone for attending. So everyone can go and warm up now.